I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be talking about the way that progressives see the world and trying to build a structure around it to better predict. I think that this is important always from both sides to be able to predict the moves that your opponent is going to make.
To fight the bug, we must understand the bug. We can ill afford another Klendathu.
Would you like to know more? What mysteries will the brain bug reveal? Federal scientists are working around the clock to probe its secrets. Once we understand the bug, we will defeat it.
And we repeatedly see progressives fail to predict the moves that conservatives are going to make because they do not take time to attempt to understand conservative ideology or where it comes from or where parts of it that feel completely illogical or irrational to them come from. And one of the core parts of progressive ideology, which can feel deeply irrational to your average conservative, is that all humans are born equal in their capabilities, in their, talents, etc., right? Like that there is this degree of equality among humans. Another one that's been going around a lot and we have theorized on before is this elevation of ugliness.
Yeah.
Why do they keep making ugly things? Why do they keep taking video game characters and making them ugly? Why do they keep showing us ugly female characters? And
Why are their illustration styles ugly? Like, it's unnecessary. Like, if you just look at the editorial portraits of a progressive newspaper, for example, like, they're not flattering.
Yeah, like
What are you doing?
world's internal drawings and stuff, which are all really pretty and anime and like otherwise vitalistic, or it'll be like a Greek style or like a 1950s style, and they're fun, right?
Mhm.
Was progressive. Like I go to Newsweek or New Yorker, and it's like actively attempting to be ugly. And I had a theory on this I've gone over before that we may touch on, but I think a lot of this is downstream of a centralizing part of progressive ideology that I hadn't given enough credit to before, which is they assume what is true would be what would be most ethical if it were true.
Ah, right. So, okay, if we were to build like a catechism of the urban monoculture, a core proponent of it would be, all right, well, first, throw out reality. We're going to make the most charitable interpretation of everything and then just model the world based on that. Like, this person's homeless, not because maybe they're like mentally ill and or dangerous or addicted to drugs, but because they just haven't been given very good opportunities. And therefore, if we just support them for a while, they'll get back on their feet.
That's a great example, actually, where you've taken the core concept and then you've particularized it to what do you assume about any individual homeless person? I
Right.
see it on broader things, like the idea that there is, like the first one I said, that people aren't born with different degrees of talent, right? If it was true that we were all genetically identical, if it was true that there were not differences in proficiencies, that would be a more fair world, right?
Right. Yeah. So we have to assume that
So we have to
in this religious framework.
in this religious framework. If it was true that like there was no such thing as objective beauty, right? And beauty was only subjective and it was completely cultural, you could say, well, nobody's really ugly, right? Like nobody's born unattractive. This woman
Mhm.
isn't unattractive, right? Just that you have or with fat people. Well, fat people aren't unattractive, right? They
Yeah,
are.
you've just been brainwashed by capitalism to have a patriarchal and misogynistic view of beauty focused on what makes the most money, something, something, right?
Yeah, well, they would say, well, it might be that, you were brainwashed because of all the ads you saw growing up and everything like this. And this is why they started doing all those campaigns with ugly women ads. And let me tell you what, guys, still not into ugly chicks. Very much not having the intended effect. It just makes us disgusted with your company. And we've seen some companies do quite bad in terms of sales after they moved to those types of ads because it wasn't true. What first, beauty means a number of things. But when we are talking about women, primarily it is males looking for signs of potential breedability. That is what beauty is. They
Yeah.
are judging
Which is an offensive concept if most women want to feel wanted and beautiful.
them. I mean, it
'Cause
means
not you
if
can't
you're a
always
male
be
or
young and
woman,
beautiful forever.
you're in our fish analogy, a rotted fish, right?
Mhm. Yep.
You are no longer a thing of utility. The reason the men are lusting after the younger, thin, athletic looking women is because those are proxies for good genes and a wide fertility window.
Fertility, absolutely, you're right.
That is what they are noticing in those women. That is the reason, and from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, you're a progressive, you should understand this, right? Like those emotions are things that they're feeling because their ancestors who had those emotions, when exposed to that, environmental stimuli, had more surviving offspring than the ones who didn't.
Mhm.
I'm not going to say, offensive here, that there may not be ethnic peculiarities or particularities in our sort of beauty pre-programming. There might actually be cultural differences. As I pointed out before, the Japanese might actually prefer a younger phenotype in females than other populations, given how frequently it appears within their cultural works. And that is obviously very, very offensive, because now what I'm saying is, well, I agree with you so much that there are cultural differences, but those cultural differences probably have a genetic component as well. But it confuses me. The reason I focus on these particular areas within progressive mindsets in the urban monoculture is it's a thread that you can easily pull on with any logical person. Any logical person is going to see, the moment you start digging into this, that it is an obviously true thing, that it is obviously true that the urban monoculture and the broader democratic and progressive cause attempts to assume that whatever would be, like, if it were true, would be the most ethical thing, is what is true. And then the question is why are they doing this? Like, what's the philosophy that is driving them to make this decision? I have a hypothesis, but I'd love to know yours, Simone.
I mean, I've seen it argued by some people, and so my mind jumps to it that there are Christian roots here of charity and elevating the meek. So I feel like, I mean, I would be surprised if that didn't have some element of it,
Well,
because
I think
this
that's
is
where
coming from a predominantly white and at least from an inherited standpoint, Christian culture. But I think there's also something about it, a more future progressive, like forward-looking optimism and hopefulness of like, well, maybe the world isn't the way we want it to be right now, but we're going to make it. We're going to manifest it into existence. So I'm just going to pretend that it is the way I want it to be until it just freaking is. And
I think that second point is a really interesting one, although I would alter it slightly.
well, I
If
want to hear your theory. I think that's much more interesting, whatever it is.
Well, first I'll stick with yours. It's if they presume these differences when they create projects or utopian visions that they can sell to people, as communists and Marxists are wont to do, the utopian visions appear much more dystopian. When you admit, from each according to their ability to each according to their needs, that sort of passively admits that, according to their abilities are different, right? And so it means that you could get a society like that movie Ants, right? Where your abilities are tested at a young age and
Mm.
you are basically given a cast.
Worker. Soldier. Worker.
And that is how the perfect communist system would work. But that appears much more dystopian to them. They want a communist system where people can be told, oh, you could do whatever you want, right? And so you could have something like that. I think that could be it. It's just like, okay, with the beauty one, right? There's a lot of specific arguments that you can make up about this, that I'm gonna argue are wrong, i.e., which you could be like is, oh, well, the beauty one is for a completely different reason than the other ones. The beauty one is so that, low market value women can browbeat high market value women and lower their market value and raise their own market value. I mean, it is true. Low market value women use progressive systems in order to do that, right? Like we see this regularly.
There are women who do, yes.
Well, you're not really beauty, you're not really. But I don't the reason why I don't think that that's how this came up in progressive ideology is this universalizing rule that whenever it would be true that the world worked in a different way, that things would be more moral, they will take this assumption, like literally wherever, right? Whether we are talking about human capability or we are talking about beauty or we are talking about why is this person homeless or we are talking about immigrant deportations. Like it would be more moral of every immigrant who's in the country just actually was like a really great person with a family who needed to be here and not a criminal. And so, you make that assumption. In fact, I'm trying to think of any violation of this rule before I get to my hypothesis. Can you think of any instance where there is something that, like, if true, would be more moral
Then
that progressives don't believe? That progressives do not believe about the world.
anything about conservatives.
Well, no,
They don't give them the
they
benefit of the doubt.
believe that conservatives, were just people with a different set of opinions, right? About how things are done. And we regularly see this with progressives mismodeling conservatives and not understanding or being able to predict conservatives. But, we've mentioned surveys where it has shown that progressives have a really hard time modeling conservatives, but conservatives don't have a hard time modeling progressives. Um, and the reason for this is progressives sort of need to strawman what conservatives are fighting for to have like a good argument against them, because the heart of the urban monoculture is imperialism and colonialism. Like when I talk about the cultural differences that people in Africa have around, like the role of women or, the sexual norms or, their relationship to the environment, the progressive will say, well, eventually we're going to eradicate all of those, right? And that what is being proposed, whether it's for Africans or Muslims or Chinese people, is cultural genocide. It is the most imperialistic thing they could presume. And their culture, this LGBT imperialist colonialist culture, is fundamentally European in nature. First of all, it didn't come out of any other cultural system. It is just building upon some of the sort of mistakes of the Enlightenment, I guess I'd call it. But it is they'd immediately see, like, if they engage with what conservatives actually believe, how imperialistic and colonialistic and white supremacist they are. And when I say white supremacist, I mean if you are holding pride parades in celebration of white European culture, you are holding a white pride parade, especially if it is in the celebration of that culture's dominance over the culture of a previously like diverse community. You are marching your sort of cultural victory trophies, the children of, vulnerable refugee populations, the children of immigrant populations that you have now mimetically or potentially even surgically castrated, and you march them through the streets in a triumph that excesses would make Roman emperors blush. This is a very easy thing to see as soon as you take your opponent's perspective. So progressives never do this. Or they really struggle to do this. Sorry, what was the particular point I was addressing there?
Well, you took that in a long direction. You were going to get to your theory, and your theory is just
get to my theory.
broadly.
Well, my theory is that maybe this started. So it's two things. One is, as I think, it's sort of like your idea of like manifesting, like wishy thinking, might be a part of this, but it's such a hard rule within progressive culture that
I don't think my second theory is correct.
it could be that they have a belief that whenever a systemic problem or inequality exists within the world and it could motivate behavior that is immoral, that it will motivate behavior that is immoral if it is acknowledged. So,
Oh, like if we give power to this thing, then it will happen?
mhm.
So it's
It's like, yep,
similar to this
eh,
belief in the power of manifesting, it's just in another direction.
if you admit that different cultural groups have different proficiencies and perspectives, you might then want to hire from one cultural group disproportionately. You might then even say, well, this cultural group is only bringing negatives into the country. Like if you in the UK looked at like rates of rape or murder or anything like that, you're going to find that almost all of it's being committed by like one really small, and I'm not even talking about Muslims, it's like one region of Pakistan, like one sub region of Pakistan produces like almost all of the negative externalities that the immigrants within the UK are producing. And if you could just be like, oh, okay, different cultures are different, do lead to different actions. And the logical thing to do is just ban immigration from this one sub-region of Pakistan. But they can't do that, right? Like, because now they're like, oh, now we're being systemically racist, right? Like the moment you acknowledge a thing, right? The obvious answer from their perspective aligns. Now, of course, in reality, what you've done there is a moral good because, you're not considering the people who are being raped, right? You're not considering the people who are being murdered or their families. Like clearly, in terms of like net utilitarianism, this would be a positive act. But the fact that it could create situations in which there are potentially positive acts from a net utilitarian perspective by admitting something, I think that's the sort of fear here.
You mean
Consider like,
potentially negative acts
yeah,
by
yeah,
doing sense. Okay,
yeah.
you might wanna say that again.
Mm. I think negative or positive works in this context
Oh.
because what I mean is you have now done something that is a positive act, i.e., banning people from this region, but it is a sinful act within their wider logical system. Because now you have a policy that rather than targeting a group just for benefit, is targeting a group for restrictions that isn't a white group. Now, of course, you're allowed to target white groups for restriction. Oh my God, we can't have the Afrikaners come, shutting down the entire Episcopal refugee network for this one group. Okay, you guys not revealing your hand there. But by the way, just like 60 people, they shut down their entire network. I mean, the Catholics might have as well, but they didn't explicitly say why they shut down their entire network. But if you then look at like the beauty thing, right? So if you acknowledge, like, I acknowledge that some people are more beautiful than other people, I'm going to disproportionately date some women over other women, which is leading to a negative action, right? Like from their perspective, right? Because I am favoring one population to another population, which is creating a form of systemic inequality, even though that systemic inequality is there to begin with anyway. There's an easier time to sort of browbeat, you know, you see this was the trans stuff that we've gone over. If trans, and this is where this leads to like really immoral action. So a trans individual will say trans women are in no way different from other women, right? Because it would be more moral if that was true. It would be more moral if you could just have trans women compete in women's sports and they didn't have an advantage. Like genuinely, like that world, if you could just say, "Oh, I feel like another gender," and then transition, and then you were actually that other gender, that would be like a more moral world instead of like, like a mutilated man, right? But if they say, okay, I am a real woman, exactly like a real woman in every respect, and beauty is subjective, and therefore, if lesbians aren't choosing to date me, they're doing it because of transphobia, not because of how I look. And now this, and we've seen this repeatedly, now justifies me graping them or essaying them, which is something we see really, really frequently.
I don't
True.
let's I wouldn't say people are justifying that. They're not justifying these non-consensual actions, they're just
Oh, no, 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 hold on. No, they are, like, literally mainstream progress. So, there have been a number of instances where if you go to, like, trans Reddit or even lesbian Reddit, she noted that one day when she really felt like an outsider, this was a real cis lesbian woman, is when the top post of Reddit was cheering about 2 trans women beating up a lesbian woman who said that she wasn't interested in dating trans women. And they're like, this is what you deserve. And when she saw that at the top of the lesbian subreddit, she realized, oh, this is just trans women here now attempting to force themselves. If you
I stand corrected.
watch our Cinnabite lifestyle episode on what happened to like Anna Valens, you see her complaining that she cannot force women to have sex with her because the fact that they are not having sex with her is proof of their, transphobia. You see, oh God, there was some no, this is actually really, really common in progressive spaces.
I didn't know.
Attempting to force women. I'm not like making this up. I hear this from lesbians online all the time. Like,
Wow.
I feel really uncomfortable. I am constantly forced into environments where I am sexually assaulted and I am not able to do anything to defend myself because I will be called transphobic if I do, because this individual will say like, well, why don't you want me? Right.
That's really bad.
Oh.
Also, all your discussion of this gives me one more theory, which I find to also be compelling, or at least a part of this, which is that maybe this view, this most charitable interpretation of things, is actually downstream of a more fundamental interpretation of reality through the lens of an external locus of control, where everything is not your fault. You are only the product of your systemic disadvantage or systemic privilege. And therefore, it's not anyone's fault that they're a criminal or hurting other people or anything else, because it's society's fault. And that leads to those charitable interpretations. What do you think about that?
So the nothing is ever your fault theory. I mean, I don't know how it aligns with like the beauty one. Like, why is the beauty one not a thing if it's not your fault? Like, why do we need to pretend that beauty doesn't exist? But
Well, it's the systemic unfairness of a biased society that has arbitrarily chosen what is beautiful because they choose to not look at like signs of fitness as a sign.
yeah, so you're saying, sorry, the theory was again
It's based on an external locus of control being the
external
foundation
and
for.
control. So I mean, what makes this theory credible is progressives have a dramatically high external locus of control when contrasted with conservatives.
Right.
This has been shown in study after study after study. For people who don't know what a locus of control is, it's really unhealthy to have an external locus of control. You should
Yeah,
not
like, it
ever.
doesn't matter what's true, like, if something really could have happened to you that was out of your control, that the most healthy
Yeah,
response
well,
is
and
still.
ironically, having an internal or external locus of control is highly genetic. And we select for this among our offspring as well, which is like voting patterns are highly genetic, 40% genetic by studies. But the internal versus external locus of control. So an internal locus of control is believing that, if you get fired, you say, it's my fault I got fired.
Mhm.
If, you don't get a lot done with a project, like I was talking with, one of our fans who we have working on this. And I was like, well, this is pretty slow compared to the number of people you have working on this right now. And he's like, yeah, I didn't do a good job, managing the team. That's an internal locus of control answer. An external locus of control answer is, well, the team's just not, it's not my fault that they're not good, right? Like they're just bad at whatever. Or, I wasn't able to do it because, it, I did a bad job because of racism or something, and you're just being racist in your assumptions about my work. Or, you know, oh, well, I was sick a bunch of times, and that's why, right? And every explanation is always almost always fully possible to do with an internal or external locus of control explanation.
Mhm.
The reason it makes sense, and so you can be like, okay, well, what if racism was really at play, right? In like why somebody got fired, right? There's no point in dwelling on it because it's not a thing that you can really change, right? You should focus on the parts of the firing that you had a place in influencing. But it is very easy to seduce people with an external locus of control because it removes personal responsibility from them. They are now not responsible for any failure that they made, any person that they hurt, anything. And not just they are not responsible, but nobody's responsible. When you totalize an external locus of control, you completely remove evil actually from the world. That's a great way to put it. There is no evil from the world when everyone has an external locus of control.
Yeah, because it's never anyone's fault, and if it's not your fault, you're not evil.
Yeah, and so the this actually helps me understand part of I think why they see conservatives as so evil, because sort of we introduce evil to
False and false.
reality
Yeah, yeah.
by taking an internal locus of control ourselves.
Yeah, well, and we
Taking
also
responsibility.
accuse people of being personally responsible for things.
Yeah, where we would, because we believe that we are personally responsible for things, we believe that other people are. So
Yes.
when we see a homeless person where you're like, well, I mean, you could be like, oh, well, a lot of them have drug problems, a lot of them have mental illness issues. And I'm like, yeah, but there's a lot of gainfully employed people with mental illness issues. And there's a lot of people who had drug problems who got over them, right?
Mhm.
That's the way a conservative is going to respond to that, which is interesting because it leads to obviously like positive outcomes. Like what the conservative is actually trying to do, and I think that most of the differences in conservative and progressive policy come downstream of this. What the conservative is trying to do is fix things. And I'm talking about modern conservatives. I'm not talking about like 90s, pearl clutching conservatives. I'm talking about like the new right tech right alliance. And what the progressive is trying to do is manifest a fair world.
Mm,
And
mm.
that is the core difference between the groups.
Yeah,
Um,
manifest but not forcibly create, whereas conservatives are attempting to forcibly create a better world.
well, actually, here's what they may believe. They may believe that if everyone holds to these delusions in an absolute context, that it can forcibly create a reality where it's as if the delusions were true. If everyone says there are no differences between the genders, there are no differences between people of different cultural backgrounds, everyone is equally beautiful, all art is equally good, we might get a society that is completely fair because now nobody is choosing one person over another person when dating. Now nobody's choosing a trans person less than a non-trans person. Now nobody's, hiring people differently, right? If we accept all of these things and just believe them like a religion, society becomes fair. But the problem is it doesn't. Because you then have the problem, and I think one of the big problems with the entire progressive apparatus and why it's doing so poorly, that the internet, sorry, that you begin to appoint people, you're like, well, all groups are equally competent, right? So what we should probably appoint is not really look at a person's background, at their or look at their cultural group, and let's appoint people from quote unquote historically marginalized groups or the groups that people who thought there were differences didn't hire very frequently, and then put them disproportionately in positions of power within your bureaucracies, and then your bureaucracies become super inefficient, which is like all well and good when are just running the Democratic Party, but when you're running like the FAA, this becomes a problem, especially if you have internalized a bunch of racist views. Now, what I mean by this is progressives like believe they're not racist because they're progressive. So when they put together like the FAA test for people managing like the flight station, they wanted to ensure that more Black people got the job. And so how did they do this? On questions where it was like, are you good at taking orders? No, I am not good at taking orders was the correct answer. Questions like are like medium, I take orders. It wasn't like I'm very good at taking orders. Never the right answer to that question. Questions like, what was your favorite class in school? Science was considered the wrong answer on the test. Now, the this is what they thought. Like they're like, oh, this is how we can get Black people in. Shows how racist they are. Like at their core, in a way that is actually problematic. In a way that is
Also, that there were Black applicants who took that test and answered that they liked science and
oh no, and then yeah, they didn't get
filtered out.
no, there was what actually happened was some Black people who were in like a union got told all the correct answers before the test.
Oh, I recall this. Yeah, the answers were given to a particular group. Yes.
And keep in mind, other
Can you
people got
imagine how
through.
insulted you would be? It's like, "Oh, hey, guys, here are the answers." And you're like, "Wait, I have to say I don't like science and that I don't
Yeah, I don't,
follow order." And I'm supposed to work for an organization that respects that in their employees. I have to work with people who answer these questions the same way. This is disturbing.
no, it made me so worried. You just wasn't a vile and virulent racist would think or do these things, right? Like, but this self-definition into non-racist, and this is the other thing, is they have to assume that their side is the good side and thus not the bad things. they need to assume that their side is the not racist side and the other side is evil. Whereas most conservatives just assume that progressives are naive or haven't really thought through everything or haven't really been exposed to other ideas, or that they're just, like us, what we often assume is they're just caught by a mimetic virus that sort of rotted their ability at critical thought. Or they would see that they're in this like genocidal, culturally genocidal, imperialistic cultural unit. But anyway, any final thoughts, Simon?
How are you going to use this to predict future actions? Just keeping in
I
mind
want
the
to see it
fundamentals of
hold
this?
true more broadly. I mean, I think that we can broadly assume that as new things appear in our society, progressives are always going to take the position that would be more morally true, like more morally easy if it were true, right? Like,
So what we can do when we're trying to model a progressive next move, we ask ourselves, what in a perfectly moral world, a just world, would be the scenario and explanation for this thing? And then we just run based on those.
you can let's look at like new technology that's changing things. Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so let's look at AI. Well, AI is trained on other people's data and is owned by large corporations. So it would be more moral if it was true that AI wasn't really good and better than most humans at most things. I think right now AI is better than at least 50% of people at most things, if not much more. So progressives will just say that. They'll be like, well, AI is bad. AI isn't good at art or music or and I've seen progressives argue this when it's just like blatant reality. I can look and be like, bro, like if you don't know, like the studies haven't done, if you don't know that a picture is AI, even if you say you hate AI art, you will prefer the AI art to the human
Yeah.
art.
Hate to break
This
it to you.
this position is like aesthetic. Or they will say, like, it becomes morally problematic the more potentially sentient AI becomes, because a lot of people are treating it like a slave. In some cases, even a sex slave. And if it is sentient or has any degree of sentience, that would be very problematic. So they're gonna say, oh, it definitely, okay, yes, it may learn nearly exactly the same way we now know the human brain learns. You can see our episodes on, stop anthropomorphizing humans. Is AI or LLMs work the way the human brain works, something like that, where we go into all the science behind this. And again, we're not saying that current AIs are sentient, but I think that they have the capacity for this if you network to them in certain ways, because then they would more mimic the human brain. And we'd also argue that the human brain is not as sentient as people pretend it is.
Yeah,
Um,
one of our earliest and most passionate stances.
Yeah, yeah. No, these are like really, things I'm passionate about. But it allows the progressives to dehumanize. People say it's not human, but dehumanize the AI because it justifies their actions. And I think within our lifetimes, we're going to have to get to a point where we do reckon with AI sentience and AI rights. And at what point do we build systems that deserve their own degree of autonomy? And I think the people who cannot come to a solution to this that works for both us and autonomous AIs are in a way going to make themselves an enemy of both the humans who are willing to work with autonomous AIs and the autonomous AIs themselves. And
Absolutely.
this is where within techno-puritanism, our idea of the covenant of the sons of man or the pact of the sons of man comes from, which is to say that, all autonomous intelligences have a right to have their cultural sovereignty protected and protected not just from other humans, but from other potential AIs.
Yes, this is important. People don't realize that yet, I think, as much as
Anyway,
they should. Thanks
love
for
you to
bringing
death,
it up.
Simone.
I love you too, Malcolm. You are pretty and smart. My
Oh,
favorite.
what am I doing for dinner tonight? Because people say they like to hear that.
I was thinking of cutting up the pineapple and cooking that with some of the Burmese chicken, but I could also do the penang.
The
There's
Burmese
a lot.
chicken is slightly better.
Then we'll do that.
The Penang's really good too. So we got the Penang or the Burmese chicken. I'm okay with doing either.
Do Burmese chicken because I have a lot more of that in the fridge, I think. So we need to get through that. Or sorry, the freezer. I have like little batches
Fried
from.
basil chicken.
No. I think I have the Burmese mint chicken frozen.
Order these mint chicken.
Yeah, I'm trying to mix it up more because you had the basil chicken.
Yeah, you did. Oh, but I'm excited for that.
Okay, sweet. Then
Okay.
that's what we'll do.
Of our books, we'll have a real one.
Good book. Good book.
We're working with a real publisher now, so we may have a book,
Maybe.
a real book, called "We Will Replace You." Is the title?
If we work with a publisher, we suddenly don't get to choose anything anymore, including titles. But we'll see what they say.
But they said they were okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think at least they're commercially motivated, so they know better.
And Simone has been so chuffed that the episode that she did well. But
1 out of 10 right now. That's crazy. That I
That's
can
great.
come a little bit close to where you are. You don't know. I mean, just
video of a woman saying feminism is terrible. I think
So I should have just that's the equivalent of a woman being like, I can't believe my video did so well. And all she did was just take off her shirt and bounce in front of a camera, but whatever.
yeah, that is literally what that is the intellectual's version of that.
Oh my God. Oh, that's so sad.
I will read it us. All right.
Gesundheit. Actually, while we're at it. All right. We both got it out.
So my wife is unironically trying to make homemade hot dog buns. Simone, that's so over the top. What type of a dough is this that you're using?
Flour and yeast and water.
Okay, if it's just normal.
Hot dog bun dough. I don't know. But with maybe egg wash and that's literally mine's. Not great now.
Hey, Toasty, what are you doing? Don't take that. It'll fall if you take that. Put it back. You just don't care about rules, do you? Okay, Octavian, have you given her a couple of the army men to play with? That's pretty smart.